Thank you for joining us as we consider the fiscal year 2012 budget request for the Department of the Army Equipment Modernization Programs. Today we have two panels. Panel 1 witnesses include General Pete Corelli, Vice Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Robert Lennox, Deputy Chief of Staff of the Army for Requirements, and Lieutenant General William Phillips, Military Deputy to the Assistant Secretary of the Army, Acquisition, Logistics, and Technology. Panel 2 witnesses include Dr. Michael Gilmore, Director, Operational Test and Evaluation, Office of Secretary of Defense, and Mr. Michael Sullivan, Government Accountability Office, Director of Acquisition and Sourcing, and William Graveline, General Accountability Office. Gentlemen, thank you for being here and thank you for your service to our country. I just returned from having led a delegation of members on a visit to Afghanistan, where we met with personnel from all of our services at several different locations. While I have always had misgivings about our involvement in Afghanistan, I want to note how I was again so highly impressed with the extraordinary courage, dedication, and sacrifice and ability demonstrated every hour, every day by our service personnel. They are really quite remarkable. We have always done our best to make sure our personnel have what they need to execute their missions. I have been re-energized by this most recent experience to make sure we do all we can to support the absolutely outstanding men and women serving our nation. In terms of this year's budget request, the Army's top two modernization priorities are the tactical network and the ground combat vehicle programs. However, I would like to maintain that the number one modernization priority remains soldier equipment. And saying that, I don't mean to imply that properly equipping the soldier hasn't always been a priority, especially for the witnesses in front of us today, but whom I know share that concern. There is no doubt that the equipment and body armor that our soldiers have today is saving lives. However, individual riflemen commonly carry in excess of 100 pounds of gear on all dismounted missions, some more, some less than that. Equipment weight is a constant complaint we hear about when we talk to our deployed soldiers. Not surprising, we also see an alarming number of musculoskeletal non-combat injuries in our military hospitals. While we certainly support enhancing the individual soldier's capability and protection, the price we often pay is more weight. I've often wondered if we would have taken just 5% of what we spend on the now terminated Future Combat Systems program and applied it to lessening the weight of what our soldiers carry, where would we be today? I know Ranking Member Reyes shares my concern, which is why we have scheduled a specific hearing on this issue next week. Somehow we must figure out how to incentivize industry and academia to lessen the weight for our soldiers without lessening the protection that weight provides them. In terms of the tactical network, I've always felt that one of the many mistakes that were made with the FCS program was that the Army should have first and foremost focused on getting the network right, instead of trying to do all of the vehicles and unmanned vehicle components of the program simultaneously. We understand the importance of what the Army is trying to do with the tactical network. If we're going to send a soldier into harm's way, he or she should never have to open a communications device and have it say, "Service not available," or "Can you hear me now?" The committee has been very critical of the lack of network strategy over the last couple of years. It is my understanding that the Army has made a lot of progress this last year in laying out a nested network strategy. However, I am reminded of the old adage that a vision without resources is an hallucination. We need assurances that the network is based on an open architecture, isn't dependent on proprietary designs, and that it is pursued using full and open competition. Finally, the committee has and continues to support the Army's goal of pursuing a modernized combat vehicle. However, the committee needs to understand the rationale as to why the ground combat vehicle should proceed as scheduled or if it should move to the right in time. How do we know that the GCV is the full spectrum vehicle the Army needs? Why did the Army not complete an analysis of alternatives before it issued the original request for proposals, as this committee had encouraged? Can the Army afford to launch another program that could cost up to $30 billion to procure a vehicle that carries a squad of 9 instead of the current 6? Why not consider as an alternative option continuing to upgrade Abrams, Bradleys, and Strykers, focus on the network, and take part of the funds and apply it to lightening the load of the soldier? 10 years ago, we were told that the Paladin howitzer couldn't be upgraded, and the Crusader and then non-line of sight cannon, NLAW-C, was the only solution. And now that those programs have been terminated, we are pursuing an upgraded Paladin howitzer, which we were told we couldn't do earlier on, albeit with technologies from Crusader and Network and NLAW-C. They weren't a total loss. To be clear, I am not saying that I don't support the GCV program. And to be fair, I believe the Army requirements will become clearer to the committee once the results of the analysis of conservatives are submitted. However, as was the case with the FCS program, it is this committee's responsibility to ask the hard questions now so that we don't learn in 5 years that the Army can't afford the GCV or that it is based on exquisite requirements. I now yield to my good friend and ranking member, Mr. Reyes, for any remarks that he cares to make.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'd also like to add my welcome. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here today, and thank you for your service. Today's hearing on Army modernization again comes at a critical time for our Army. The Army has been at war for almost 10 years, the longest continual period of combat for the U.S. Army since the war in Vietnam, and the longest war ever for an all-volunteer Army. Like all wars, these wars have changed the Army in profound ways, and sometimes in ways that weren't predicted. The Army of today features soldiers operating from widely dispersed fixed locations and in relatively small elements, usually a company or below, instead of the constantly moving large formations that the Army practiced to fight for decades. The Army of today integrates unmanned systems, intelligence networks, biometrics, and communications networks in a way that was unforeseen before September 11th of 2001, when the term IED was not even in the Army's lexicon. At the same time, today's Army leadership faces the same dilemma faced by their predecessors, namely answering two critical questions. First, what kind of missions must the Army prepare for to perform? And second, how to equip the Army of today while preparing for the Army of tomorrow. Today's hearing will center on finding that critical balance and focus on the point for these two very important and pivotal questions. The fiscal year 2012 Army budget requested for modernization, from my viewpoint, is commendable in many different ways. For the first time in many years, the Army has a single modernization strategy that is integrated and resourced and that covers the 5 key aspects of equipping the force. Our chairman mentioned most of them, but they are soldier equipment and weapons, and I certainly share the same concerns that the chairman does in terms of the weight and finding ways to address that challenge. Second, communications, intelligence, and network equipment. Third, aviation and UAVs. Fourth, armored combat vehicles. And fifth, wheeled combat vehicles. A great deal of the credit for this clear and integrated approach lies with the Vice Chief of Staff, General Corelli, who we are fortunate is here to testify at this hearing. While he has not yet fixed every single problem in Army modernization, his efforts and hard work have put the Army in a much stronger position to justify and protect its modernization efforts, both in the Pentagon and certainly here in Congress. When Secretary Gates testified before our committee in February, he said that because the future is so uncertain, procurement funds must be focused on those areas that are useful in many possible operations, not in any narrow range. In my view, the Army's 2012 budget request does that in most areas. It invests heavily in modernizing and expanding the Army's aviation capability and network communications. Both are areas essential to today's fight in Afghanistan and that the Army will be able to use in the future no matter what kind of operations it conducts. Second, significant funds are also requested for upgrades for soldier personal equipment that's intended to improve lethality and protection while, again, reducing the critical weight factor. Another area where the Army will benefit regardless of what the future holds and what future missions develop. In this request, the Army also continues to aggressively modernize its fleet of wheeled vehicles, from AMRAPs to trucks to Humvees. And finally, in terms of armored vehicles, the request makes what were probably the most difficult judgment calls. The request clearly focuses on the future with heavy investment in the ground combat vehicle program. In order to achieve this focus on the future, however, the request does show a significant drop across the board in ongoing upgrades for current vehicles. In three major cases, the Abrams tanks, the Bradley fighting vehicles, and Stryker vehicles, the Army has chosen to accept the risk of production shutdowns in the 2013 to 2016 timeframe, as the Army waits to produce upgraded versions of these vehicles at the end of this decade. These shutdowns will present significant challenges to the Army and the defense industrial base. So I look forward to hearing more today about how the Army will mitigate the risk involved with this plan. However, despite this and other challenges, the Army Modernization Budget request for 2012 represents a solid plan for the future that seeks to balance the needs of today with the potential needs of tomorrow. While the subcommittee will carefully review this plan, I think the Army is starting from a position of strength, in large part due to the hard work over the past year from the three gentlemen that are sitting at our witness table. So today, Mr. Chairman, I look forward, as you do, to hear more about the details that will significantly impact the Army in 2012 and beyond. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Reyes. Without objection, all witness statements will be made a part of the hearing record. General Corelli, we do not normally have the benefit of hearing from the Vice Chief of Staff at our yearly Subcommittee Modernization hearing, so we really appreciate you taking the time to help us understand the Army's modernization priorities. Clearly, among your many responsibilities, Army equipment modernization is an issue of great importance to you in the Army, or you wouldn't be here today, sir. Thank you very much. I understand, General, that you have the oral testimony representing all three of you. Is that correct?
I do, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Thank you. Please proceed with your opening remarks.
Chairman Bartlett, Ranking Member Reyes, distinguished members of the subcommittee, I thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the fiscal year 2012 budget request as it pertains to Army acquisition and modernization. I am joined by my colleagues, Lieutenant General Bob Lennox, Deputy Chief of Staff of the Army G8, and Lieutenant General Bill Phillips, Principal Military Deputy to the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Acquisition, Logistics, and Technology. We look forward to answering your questions at the conclusion of these opening remarks. As you are all aware, our nation's military continues to face a broad array of complex challenges as we approach the start of the second decade of a long-term struggle against a global extremist network. Today's uncertain and dynamic strategic and operational environments, coupled with current political and fiscal realities and the rapid pace of technological development, have made our outdated Cold War-era strategies no longer supportable. To be successful now and into the future, we require a strategy that takes a more focused and affordable approach to equipping our force. Our evolved strategy, aligned with the Army Force Generation Model, R4Gen, will allow us to incorporate lessons learned, improve or maintain core capabilities, incrementally modernize to deliver new and improved capabilities, and integrate portfolios to align our equipment modernization communities, thereby enabling us to develop and field a versatile and affordable mix of equipment, ensuring our soldiers and units have the resources and capabilities they need to be successful across the full range of military operations today and into the future. As part of the Army Modernization Plan 2012, we have prioritized our materiel programs to focus on capabilities which give our units and our soldiers a decisive edge in full-spectrum operations. While considering program cost and size, the emphasis is on capabilities critical to Army success and our ability to network the force, deter hybrid threats, and defeat hybrid threats, and protect and empower soldiers. I've talked about the importance of the network with members of the subcommittee on numerous occasions. I believe it represents the centerpiece of the Army's modernization program. and today I'm pleased to report we're making significant progress. The Army is past talking concepts. We are making the network happen, delivering needed capability downrange as we speak. Certainly, there is much more work to be done, but I am confident we're headed in the right direction. Much of what we're trying to accomplish in terms of improving the pace of Army acquisition derived from what we learned about the network and about the nature of rapidly evolving technologies. However, the principles have application across the entire modernization program. I'm prepared to discuss in greater detail the specifics of the Army's critical FY12 priority programs as outlined in my statement for the record and during questions and answers. The advanced technologies, added capabilities we are pursuing are vital to the success of our force. That said, we recognize that modernizing the force is not solely about buying new or better equipment. It also has to do with spending money wisely and finding efficiencies wherever possible. I assure the members of the subcommittee, I and the Army's other senior leaders remain diligent in our efforts to be good stewards of scarce taxpayer dollars. Over the past year, our ongoing capability portfolio review process, we've identified a number of areas we're able to make changes and eliminate redundancies or outdated requirements. In fact, as part of the Department of Defense's reform agenda, the Army has proposed $29 billion in savings over the next 5 years, and we will not stop. We will continue to pursue further efficiencies in the days ahead. In the meantime, I respectfully request your support of the Army's proposed research, development, and acquisition budget of $31.8 billion for FY12. We believe this request allocates resources appropriately between fielding advanced technologies in support of soldiers currently in the fight and the development of technologies for the future. Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, I thank you again for your continued generous support and demonstrated commitment to the outstanding men and women of the United States Army and their families. We, all three of us, look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your collectively many years of service to our country. As is my custom, I will ask my questions last, hoping that they will all have been asked so that I won't need to ask any. And I now turn to my ranking member for his questions.
Chances are probably not, Mr. Chairman. Well, my first question deals with the Army's #1 priority vehicle, which is the ground combat vehicle. So far, the Army has justified the need for the GCV by pointing at the need for better protection, more onboard power, and the ability to carry additional soldiers. However, there are those that have argued that an upgraded Bradley vehicle would be adequate to meet the Army's needs. So my questions are, what specific new threats, especially in terms of IEDs and anti-tank missiles, is the Army worried about in the 2020 timeframe when the GCV would be available in large numbers? Second, what about an upgraded Bradley? Would that not be adequate to meet these future threats? And third, what about using lasers and other directed energy weapons in the future? How does the GCV compare in relation to upgrading Bradley vehicles in this very important regard? So I'll leave it open, General, for whoever wants to tackle those.
Well, I'll just make a few comments, sir. First of all, the Bradley's going to be around for a long time. The GCV is a fighting vehicle, and it's a full spectrum vehicle. We believe we have revisited our first RFP, put out a second RFP where we carefully went over every single one of the requirements, that we've worked very, very hard to ensure that as a full spectrum vehicle, this is a vehicle that can be used across the spectrum. And one of the things it does is offers capability packages. Those capability packages would give it an opportunity to work in environments such as Afghanistan and in different parts of Afghanistan and Iraq where there are different threats. And with the addition of those capability packages, mostly in passive armor, the vehicle gets heavier or lighter when you take them off. In addition to that, we're going to finally get the entire squad, although the Bradley, as pointed out, takes less than the squad. Finally, in the GCV, we'll be able to put the entire infantry fighting squad. In addition to that, we'll be able to provide an interpreter and a medic a place to be, which are critical on today's battlefield. We're working very, very hard to get it out in a 7-year period because we believe we need the size, weight, and power to power the network in a infantry fighting vehicle. But I will let Bill and Bob make further comments, but I just want to say that Bradley's going to be around for a long time. Gentlemen?
Sir, I would just only add one thing. When you see the analysis of alternatives that will come forward, part of the Bradley, the second question that you had, the Bradley piece of that will be considered as a part of the GCV program, so you'll see that coming forward. The other piece that I want to emphasize for GCV that General Corelli sort of alluded to is we took the original RFP on the 25th of August of last year and we decided to pull it back. When we went through and recharacterized all the requirements that were over 900, we determined that the big four that General Corelli just described, we came up with about 130 that were critical to make sure that we met the big four capability inside the GCV. And the others were tradable in some kind of way. That is going to allow us to get this vehicle in 7 years at an affordable cost. The other point that I would emphasize is incremental capability with the GCV itself. We'll build a vehicle in 7 years, and then we want to be able to upgrade that vehicle over time.
If I could just add one other thing. What is amazing, if you look back at Army vehicle modernization, is the story of the M1 tank. Now, we're not building a tank, but what we like to do is have a program like the Abrams. Think about it. The Abrams, 1978 technology that's been upgraded from a 105-millimeter gun to a 120-millimeter gun, from a commander's weapon station that I remember we not all of us had a rough time operating, to one today that makes each Abrams tank worth 2 Abrams tanks. That's because that vehicle was built with size, weight, and power built into it to allow it, over time, to have incremental builds. That's what we want to do with GCV. We want a vehicle that looks much different 10 years from now than 7 years from now when it first comes out, because we are able, through incremental builds, to put new technologies on that vehicle as they become proven and capable.
Okay. Thank you very much for that additional information. Which brings me to a second concern, and that is that the budget proposal for 2012 shows production breaks for the Abrams tank, Bradley fighting vehicle, and Stryker vehicles starting in 2013 that could last projected from 3 to 5 years. The 5-year plan then shows production of upgrades starting back up in 2016 or later. So the questions that I have are, how will defense industry maintain these production lines during the period, the shutdown years? How can the Army be sure that those production lines will still be there after they've been mothballed for several years? And what is the economic impact going to be? What will the Army do to keep the workers employed at those companies? Because obviously a concern that I and other members have is that the skilled workforce would just move elsewhere and would not be available again when these production lines are called upon.
Congressman Reyes, great question and great concern, and not one that we didn't consider this year. As General Corelli led us through our portfolio review of the entire combat vehicle fleet, we took a very holistic review this year, and our FY12 proposal calls for about $2.5 billion that tries to balance transforming our combat vehicle fleet with investments in the ground combat vehicle, improving the Bradley and the Abrams for the future, and replacing the aging M113 fleet. So we're trying to accomplish all three of those things in a very fiscally informed approach in our strategy, and we've undertaken to do that. So there are going to be shutdowns. In the Abrams line, for example, we're going to finish and buy our acquisition limit of those vehicles. We're buying the very finest M1s right now, the SEP version. We've got a very good strategy that addresses both the active and the reserve component. So we've taken a good, thoughtful approach to that, but there is some risk. In the area of the Bradley, we also have a two-vehicle type fleet approach. We've looked at both the active and the reserve component. They'll both receive modernized, pure fleet versions of the Bradley, and we've again bought our limit of that vehicle. The Stryker vehicle has proven itself in combat. With this committee's help and Congress's help, we've introduced a double V hull approach to a Stryker vehicle. We're going to have one brigade that we're going to send to combat this summer, and we'll assess it. And in the FY12 approach, we've also invested in modernization programs for all three of those vehicle types. They will not prevent, however, the production break that you talked about. We're cognizant of that, and I think I'll turn it over to General Phillips, who can talk about some of our approach to that, if that's okay.
Sir, I would just say that we share the concern with the industrial base, and the industrial base across all the portfolios is incredibly important to us. It's also important that we've worked very closely with industry, and I'll just give one example. The Humvee, and with AM General and the Humvee production line. Most recently, we worked with Charlie Hall, the new president for AM General, and with the team there to work on the production capability, number of vehicles per day. And most recently, we were able to downsize slightly from 55 per day to 35 per day, which sustains the industrial base over a longer period of time. And with FMS customers and others coming in, we're able to sustain that critical capability for that production line for a period of time longer. But we must do so in the most efficient, effective manner as we consider all options, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. As you heard, bells have gone off. I think we have time for Mr. Lobiando's questions. Then it'll be about 5 minutes before the end of the vote. We'll need to recess for 3 votes. I think we'll be back so soon as we can get here.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is regarding the modernization of the Abrams tank. And in recent weeks, we've heard from Secretary of Defense, and I believe from you, General, the need to modernize the tank into the future. Specifically, the Army's budget looks like it has less than $10 million in the FY12 budget, and I think the statement was that the tank has virtually reached its upper limits for space, weight, and power. So it looks like it's about a $100 million reduction from previous budgets. In light of this, does the Army still support the Abrams modernization?
Congressman Lobiando, you're right. The FY12 submission does call for about $10 million in RDT&E for the Abrams tank. We have several hundreds of millions of dollars under-executed from previous years. So now that we think we have a strategy right and the requirements right, the combination of previous years' unexecuted funds and this amount we think is about the right amount that we can execute in FY12, and that was the rationale for our approach. In the out years, we programmed additional amounts for the Abrams.
And I might add, our modernization activities are focused on increasing the swap capability of that tank, particularly the power portion of it. So that's exactly our focus with the Abrams.
And as a follow-up question, the modernization of the Abrams engine, I understand there's a proposal that could increase fuel efficiency by up to as much as 17%, which could translate to about 50 gallons a day for one Abrams tank alone. And with the emphasis on energy efficiency and who knows where oil is going to go to per barrel, the fuel consumption could be dramatically improved. In light of the Army's energy conservation goals, does the Army believe the Abrams modernization program should also include fuel-efficient engines?
Congressman, it does, absolutely, and that's one of the alternatives for Abrams modernization. We've not yet defined what that will be, but that will certainly be one of the considerations.
Would seem that in light of the energy cost and rising skyrocketing, it might be something that could be moved a little closer to the front burner. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Generals.
Thank you so much. We have 8 minutes remaining. We probably can take one more question. And who is next in our? Ms. Songas.
Thank you, and thank you all for being here, and nice to see you again. I'd like to sort of revisit the body armor question. I know that we'll be having a hearing in the future, but nevertheless, you've heard the concerns expressed from Chairman Bartlett, from Ranking Member Reyes, and so I'd just like to revisit it. To sort of restate the concern we have, and you know it well, currently soldiers deployed in Iraq and Afghanistan are outfitted with armor that weighs as much as 40 pounds. And when combined with the gear that troops must carry in the field, the total weight our soldiers carry can exceed 120 pounds, causing skeletal injury just for the mere fact of carrying these materials. But also it poses another challenge. At an Armed Services Committee hearing just several years ago when I was newly arrived in Congress, I asked a sergeant who was testifying about his experiences using body armor in Iraq if there was a temptation to take off the armor, given its weight and restrictions on mobility. And he replied that, quote, "Yes, ma'am, there's a risk that all soldiers are willing to take. And I think that in certain situations, mission dependent, that as soldiers, we would be happy to take off some of the body armor to be more mission capable, more mobile on the ground, more flexible, faster." The President signed into law language in the fiscal year 2011 National Defense Authorization Act to establish separate dedicated budget line items for body armor to improve research, development, and procurement of body armor equipment. This was a positive step in ensuring that the Department of Defense focus on addressing weight and protection issues and that Congress provides the necessary oversight. So my question is for you, General Corelli. Why has the Department's fiscal year 2012 budget request failed to include this procurement line item created by this very committee last year for body armor research and development and failed to conform to the statutory requirement in fiscal year 2011?
Well, since I appeared before the committee last time on Lighten the Load, we've made significant progress. In one area is in body armor. I think you know that we went ahead and gave soldiers the option between the old IOTV carrier and a new lightweight plate carrier, which is 8 pounds lighter than the IOTV. That's a significant improvement over the weight we had before. I was recently out at Yuma where I saw a new 60-millimeter mortar tripod and 60-millimeter mortar that is 8.7 pounds lighter, and a new 81-millimeter mortar that is 20 pounds lighter than its predecessor. At the same time, cold and wet weather gear has been improved and is not only better but is lighter and less bulky. We continue to look at ways to further lighten body armor, but I have not heard of any technologies now that will give us the required protection as enemy capabilities continue to increase at a lighter weight. Bill, has anything you've heard of?
No, sir. I would only add a couple of points, sir, on target. Ma'am, our body armor is the most tested in the world. And for the targets for which it's designed to defeat, there's never been a body armor that has been defeated by that kind of weapon. We saw that last year, or that kind of a round. We saw that. Listened to your comments last year. We created a line this year, or in FY12, for RDT&E, and for that year and some of the out years as well, we programmed about $5.8 million of RDT&E into the body armor line. At the same time, we are currently looking at a requirement for body armor holistically that's coming forward to the Army staff, and we expect to see that requirement through the Army and approved probably in the fourth quarter of this year. And we will continue to work body armor really hard. A couple of other things that I would share on lightening the load is things as simple as shoes and boots. The boots that have been worn previously in Afghanistan, we're using a new Danner boot that reduces the weight per soldier of about 1.2 pounds. So we're looking in every way possible for the ability to lighten the load on soldiers.
Well, I think the point of a separate line item was really there is no quick answer, and obviously without a focused investment in it, we will never develop an answer. And so these sound like positive steps forward, but there is still much work to be done. 8 pounds is obviously a good thing, but the load is still altogether too heavy, and it's going to take a very focused investment in research and development. And I encourage you to engage in that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We need now to recess for the 3 votes. Thank you for your patience. The next member.
Mr. Kissel. You're up, sir. Mr. Kissel.
Okay.
Mr. Kissel.
Mr. Kissel, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I also like to thank you for your patience and thank you for the job y'all do. I have 3 worries, not questions, but worries, and you've addressed them, and I just want to kind of address them again. Number one, I worry about the troop strength. I know we're talking about 2014, but the concerns about we get the troops we need to keep the rotations we need to stay home 2 years for a year in combat, and I'm concerned we drop off, and then 6 months later we need those troops. I'm concerned about the fragmentation of what we need for today's combat in terms of equipment versus planning for the future. Do we have enough of a plan that we don't end up with a mismatch of a lot of different kind of things, and kind of 3 years from now we say, gee, how did we end up with this? And I worry about the training of the soldiers in types of warfare other than what we're doing now. So that I talked to people from the 82nd, and they, when's the last time you jumped out of an airplane? It's been a while, because that's not what we're doing now. And I could throw in the National Guard and Reserve, but I said 3. So just, I'm just curious as to some of your thoughts on these 3 areas.
Well, sir, that's why I think GCV is so absolutely important. It is a full spectrum vehicle. And we talk a lot about the light force, but every single unit that we send into theater today comes out on the other end when they get assigned their TPE or theater provided equipment looking like a heavy force. We end up putting 5 light infantrymen into a vehicle that weighs over 20 tons. That squad is running around the battlefield today going from point A to point B in 40 tons of equipment. And that's what GCV does for us. We see GCV as a vehicle for the future and for today, quite frankly. A vehicle that will add, through these capability packages, additional passive armor in composite form when it needs it, if it gets into a direct fire fight, with the ability to shed it when it's not needed and it needs protection only from underneath from an IED fight. A vehicle that could go into Sadr City, where we saw a lot of explosive form penetrators being used in Iraq with the appropriate protection on it, to when you used it out in the West, where you never saw an EFP not having to carry that extra weight. So GCV is really our attempt here to try to do something that takes into account all the lessons we've learned over the last decade and ensure we have a combat vehicle that will allow us to fight in a full spectrum environment.
If I could, Congressman, over the last year, General Corelli took us through a series of portfolio reviews, and you've heard the Secretary of Defense say we don't do very well at predicting the future. As an output of those portfolio reviews, we tried to develop strategies that emphasized versatility and adaptability. General Corelli just talked about one of them, the ground combat vehicle, very critical and important to us. The network's another one. We think if we can get the network right, it'll work across the range of military operations and empower soldiers in that regard. Our aviation and our ISR portfolios kind of add versatility to the kinds of missions we could be doing, be it along the border or in Afghanistan today or some other mission in the future. And finally, the soldier, I think Congressman Reyes went down the list earlier of the different kinds of attributes that you want to cover down in your portfolios, and empowering the soldier for the future to give them the right mix of protection and lethality are critical. And I think we've done that over the course of the last year. I'm sure we haven't gotten it right, perfectly right, but I think we've done a pretty good job at having that kind of versatility and adaptability built in.
And what's going to be different this time is we're not going to go another 10 years and not do this. We're internalizing this into the Army process so that we're reviewing this all the time. I was just down and saw the 3rd Brigade of the 82nd Airborne on Thursday. using a rifleman radio with some of the command and control software that we are providing. And I tell you, it just made me feel so good to hear those soldiers talk about a capability that we had put in their hands that is part of the Jitters family, the rifleman radio, and say this fills a capability gap that they've had for the longest period of time. They were just ecstatic about this radio and how it works. And it's really not a radio. It's all IP-based, but the ability to pass data and have voice communication with all the members of that squad using a non-proprietary waveform, SRW, that works and passes that data, and to hear those soldiers was just absolutely wonderful.
Well, I think that's one of the keys, and I know it's something we wrote into the last defense authorization, is to get feedback on new systems from the guys on the ground. And I think that's so important. And one of the points that was made, we've got to do this constantly. It's just got to be, a measuring where we are and just a constant, keeping an eye on it. And I know this is what we're going to do, but it's just, once again, it is a worry, and I appreciate your time, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Platts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, certainly my heartfelt thanks to all three of you for your dedicated and courageous service to our nation. On Friday this past week and Monday of this week, I had the somber responsibility to be at West Point for the burial of a true American hero, First Lieutenant Darren Hidalgo, and a young man who I had the privilege to nominate to West Point and gave his life February 20th in Afghanistan. And certainly a reminder of the importance of the issues we're talking about here today and the sacrifices that these courageous men and women in uniform are making in harm's way on behalf of all of us. So I sincerely appreciate what you and all in uniform are doing for us and your families. I want to touch on, and I apologize coming in late from another hearing, and I'm running a Secretary of Education in my Ed Committee hearing I've got to run to next. If I repeat anything was asked earlier, and I want to touch on mainly Bradleys and M88s. And it's my understanding that in the 012 tracked vehicle budget that there's about $250 million for upgrading the Bradleys, and that is something that you believe is, as a service branch, is critically important to not just having Bradleys out there, but having them modernized to the best of our abilities for the needs of the soldiers in the field. Is that an accurate statement?
Yes, sir, it is. $250 million allows us to pure fleet both the active and the reserve with certain types of Bradleys, the most modern types of Bradleys, and it caps off our Bradley investment.
A follow-up then specific with Bradleys and Guard, and we have our Pennsylvania Guard, also a Stryker Brigade, but interact with my Guard a fair amount here at home and overseas. Is also accurate that in the 010 funds that we're looking to upgrade the Army Guard's Heavy Brigade Combat Team to the Desert Storm operation, is that accurate?
Congressman, I can't tell you which set of funds, which year we're doing it. I know it's in the plan that takes care of the brigade in Pennsylvania and the other separate battalions that are in the National Guard. They will all be upgraded to that version. Is
there, and you may not be able to answer this today, is there a time frame for when the Guard units will start receiving the upgraded Bradleys?
I'll have to take that one for the record, Congressman. I know it's in our plan and it's in the next several years, but I can't tell you specifically when they'll see them.
Appreciate your following up with me in the committee. And then on the M88s, the A1 and A2 versions, is there plans at all to upgrade to the A2 version and across the fleet, or, all of them, or just a partial upgrade?
Congressman, it's really going to depend for us on how the ground combat vehicle develops. It will inform us whether or not we have an adequate mix of the A1 versions and the A2s, which we have today. We think we have a pretty good balance, but as we see the ground combat vehicle and improvements that may add weight to our combat vehicles in the future, we're going to have to make that decision in the out years.
Whether to maintain a mix or, okay. More of a comment is associate myself with colleagues before we broke who were addressing the issue of personal body armor and the importance of doing right in this category. And this really, General Corelli, my first time to have the privilege of interacting with you is in Iraq, and I will always remember you had a set of body armor there, including the glasses with the piece of shrapnel in one of the ballistic sunglasses. And that image or that demonstration that you gave us has stayed with me of the importance of making sure we do right by our men and women in uniform in their own personal protection, in addition to equipment modernization of the type we're talking about here today, and just associate myself with the importance of us not letting up on that effort as well. So my thanks again to each of you for your service and your testimony here today. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Kritz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just two quick questions, and one I'm going to show some ignorance because it was an article I read, and I'm trying to catch up. But I understand that the Army's going to you're slowly eliminating the Sherpa airplane from Army aviation. And if I understand correctly, was it a C-27 that was going to replace it? And now the Army's decided that there's not going to be any more Army aviators, that you're going to rely on the Air Force to supply the C-27. And I come from a state that has lots of National Guard, a lot of aviators that wear the green of the Army, and it's been a concern, and I'm just curious as to what the justification, or is this a budgetary issue, or is this something that you see that there's not a need for it?
The C-27 is the replacement, and our predecessors appeared before this committee and talked about the need for an improvement for the Sherpa, a replacement for the Sherpa, and the C-27 was always to be that replacement. There will be aviators in the Army, but we find it necessary, as we went through the portfolio on aviation, to go with earlier plans, and that was, as the C-27 comes on board, to in fact divest ourselves of the Sherpa over the next 4 years, because it is not pressurized, it is an older aircraft, and we've got to look to the Air Force to provide that mission set for us using the C-27, which is, of course, a much more capable aircraft.
Right, right. So the C-27, though, there's still going to be Army aviators flying C-27s, or that's been eliminated. The Sherpa's eliminated along with the mission for the Army.
The mission remains, but we will be supported by the United States Air Force and the C-27. The specific pilots who are currently Sherpa pilots will be given an opportunity, like pilots do many times, to transition to other aircraft that remain in the Army inventory.
Okay, thanks. And one quick question, and General Phillips, you actually answered an inquiry I had on the APU for the Abrams, and I'm going to follow up with that as well, because it seems that during Operation Iraqi Freedom, we had long fuel lines, fuel tails to supply, and it was more of an issue. And it seems like we do it in the private sector as well, so that when it's needed, everyone's saying, okay, let's study the APU, and then you get to a point where now it's not such an issue and it tails off again. And I believe we're at about 20 years now we've been studying the APU, and I'm just curious, are we ever going to see one in an Abrams in my lifetime?
Congressman, great question. As we look at the Abrams and really all of our systems, it's important that we take a holistic look on all the systems that are in there surrounding space, weight, and power. And certainly the APU that's inside the Abrams is a key part of that strategy. And also fuel efficiency as we look at fighting in places like Afghanistan and potentially other places around the world. How can we gain more fuel efficiency inside those platforms? As we look at ground combat vehicle that's been discussed at length, there is a fuel efficiency requirement that's in that system as well. JLTV, Joint Light Tactical Vehicle, also has a fuel efficiency requirement as well. So we're very serious about the systems and subsystems inside our platforms as we look at modernization for Stryker, Abrams, Bradley in terms of efficiency and greater capability as well, sir.
So I'm not sure if I heard, so where is the APU inside the Abrams? 5 years, next year?
What we've funded, Congressman, is the start of the Abrams modernization program. So in FY12, we start with our requirement. As a result of our holistic combat vehicle fleet, we've decided that we do need to upgrade the Abrams with all those concerns, and the APU will be one of those areas. Engine, APU, space, weight, and power issues inside the Abrams will all be taken as part of that, and it will be over the next 3 or 4 years before that will get finally settled out. It is in our funding, in our program, but it's not in the immediate future, not in the next year or so.
And as a tanker, I will tell you, I hate to correct you, sir, but it's been longer than 20 years. We've been looking for an APU that does everything we thought an APU would do, but it has been one of the most difficult engineering challenges I think we've had.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Mrs. Hartzler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, gentlemen. It's an honor to be here and to hear from you. I was impressed with reading all of the procurement items that we have, and glad to see that we've got some new Blackhawks, 47 new Blackhawks, 32 new Chinooks, and 19 remanufactured Apaches at Whiteman Air Force Base where we're at. Of course, we have Apaches, and we're very excited about that. I did have a couple of questions. Under on page 5, well, you don't have that. But it says that under the family of medium-heavy tactical vehicles that the 2012 budget requests $433 million for a total of 2,290 trucks and trailers. I just wondered, does that mean total then, or does that mean how many more we're going to buy this year?
Ma'am, that does mean the additional amount in FY12, and our goal is to replace the aging 2.5 ton, 5 ton, 800 series, and 900 series family of medium tactical vehicles. So we'll do this over time, and that's the FY12. You have it exactly right amount.
Okay, very good. And that would be the same for the heavy truck, the 7,928. That'd be new trucks in that category, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And there was some press articles a couple of years ago, General, that especially in the Baltimore Sun, regarding the weight reduction initiatives for soldiers, and saying that during that time there's over 20,000 soldiers were non-deployable status due to muscle or bone injuries attributed to carrying the heavy rucksacks over rough terrain. So I was wondering what improvements have been made to lighten the load of our soldiers in 2009.
I appeared before this committee last year to talk about our lighten the load efforts, and I'm here to say that we've made significant progress. I just saw the other day at Yuma Proving Grounds a brand new 60mm mortar that has been reduced 8.7 pounds, a brand new 81mm mortar that's been reduced 20 pounds using composites. We have provided a second type of body armor, what we call a plate carrier, to our soldiers, which lowers the weight 8 pounds. We fielded a brand new machine gun that is 8 pounds lighter, MK-48. It's an M240 light machine gun that's gotten rave reviews from soldiers. We're working with lighter boots, new cold weather and wet weather equipment that not only protects better but is lighter. We have a full court press on lightening the load of soldiers, and will continue to work that.
I was at Fort Leonard Wood about a month ago, and the soldiers were raving about their new boots and the shoes that they have, and how they say they're just as good as Nikes or anything. They'd rather go running in those than regular type of tennis shoes. And I'm, as a former track coach, I thought that's smart. That makes sense to have them like that. So what is the just total weight that a soldier carries then, if you have the body armor on and the sack, and what are we looking at in there?
It depends on the mission. Not every soldier will carry an 81mm mortar, but for the one who does get caught with the base plate of the mortar, to have a 20-pound savings in the weight is a heck of a lot, which allows that soldier to either carry something else, additional ammunition, or to lighten that load. Mm-hmm. But I think our studies show anywhere from about 50 pounds to some, prior to us beginning this initiative, went up to 110 or 120 pounds, depending on exactly what it is they were carrying.
That's that's amazing. I'm going to be going to Afghanistan soon. I hope to be able to put on all of that and see what it feels like. I'm a farm girl, and we'd pick up a bale of hay, and it'd weigh about like that, and that would be hard to carry that around all day. And so I appreciate your efforts to try to make it more streamlined and lighter, but yet keep the safety factor. So I applaud what you're doing. Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. I have a couple of quick questions, and then I will ask one for the record, and there may be others submitted for the record as well. General Corelli, with regard to force structure and in terms of equipping the force, what I would like to understand is the relationship between the current requirement for 45 active duty brigade combat teams and the cut to end strength of 27,000 between 15 and 16. General Casey testified last week that it took 10 years to get where we are today in terms of dwell time and equipment. How do you plan, program, and budget for equipment with a pending end strength cut of 27,000 soldiers when it is condition-based? Are there plans to reduce the current requirement of 45 active duty BCTs and or to change the current mix of heavy infantry or striker brigades?
Well, as General Casey testified, this is conditions-based. It's based on we're out of Iraq in most numbers. It's based on the drawdown in Afghanistan, progressing from this summer through 14, and it's based on no other requirement for a large number of land forces and any other contingency. I would add a fourth condition, and that's access to the reserve components. We have got to have access to the reserve components. We don't know whether that's going to be brigade combat strength that's going to come out. We're going through the mission analysis right now to look at that 27,000. But understanding the modernization program that we have brought on board and how we have done that with our capability portfolio reviews, we're looking at 2-year packages. And with a third of the force always in reset, we really believe we can do this. And it's absolutely essential we do this given the top line cut that we had so that we can ensure that we do not rob our equipment accounts to get underneath the cut that we received in the top line. So we feel that by having the time to plan for this across the board, both in equipment and exactly where we take those cuts, and given those 4 conditions, it makes a lot of sense for us to be looking at this now. But General Casey also does call it reversible planning, that based on the situation, we could, in fact, reverse and feel we would get the support of the Secretary of Defense if conditions changed.
Thank you. And the second question, as I mentioned in my opening statement, the Army continued to review its network strategy to ensure that the Army's acquisition strategy supports the needs of the warfighters and the fielding of the Brigade Combat Team Tactical Network. Would you please detail the essence of your evolving acquisition strategy, the timelines, and how you are proposing to align these with the Army's needs in Afghanistan and the BCT modernization schedule? In particular, please explain how your network strategy will impact the Joint Tactical Radio System program. And you might, if you wish, submit additional details for the record after your response to this question. Thank you.
Congressman Bartlett, great question. For us, it's really 2 key programs in FY12 get us along the big first step of building capacity in our network, and that's the WIN-T program, where we have about $1.3 billion requested, and that's the big pipes that get us from satellites down to corps, division, brigade, and battalion, and even to the company level that start providing the big pipes and capacity down to soldiers. The next is the Joint Tactical Radio System, and we've requested about $800 million for a variety of radios that take the communications then from the brigade and battalion level down through the company and platoon to the individual soldiers. You heard General Corelli talk about the rifleman's radio. That's part of our Joint Tactical Radio System. We think the program has made enormous progress, and we think it's on the verge of really providing the capacity that we need for soldiers in the future.
Key to our strategy is what we're doing out of Fort Bliss, Texas. The establishment of a full brigade combat team. We call it the AETF, that has all the equipment of the Army, from that which the light soldier has to that which the heavy soldier has, and putting them on a 4-month test schedule. We're going to solve a lot of problems out here. I know everybody looks at JUONs and ONs and getting support to the warfighter because he needs it, But many times, because we don't have anybody dedicated to being able to do this like we have now, that equipment is sent downrange without giving soldiers the opportunity to get through the integration issues. And those integration issues have to be done downrange. By putting this brigade into a 4-month test cycle, they're going to be testing every single 4 months. We're going to be able to rapidly take even the requests from the field in ONS and JUONS, Joint Operational Needs Statements and Operational Needs Statements. We're going to be able to take that, test it, integrate it, and make it so much better for the soldier downrange and rapidly get equipment to the soldier. I will tell you, we've had an amazing thing with the Stryker Double V Hull. Thanks to the next panel you're going to hear about and Dr. Gilmore's team. You know, from January 10 until about 18 months, we're going to be putting in the hands of soldiers a brand new Stryker Double V Hull that provides increased protection to them. And that was tested in accordance to ensure that we really were putting a good piece of equipment in there. And we've done it in a year and a half thanks to the great help that we got from the next panel you're going to hear from. So I really hold a lot of, I'm excited about what's going to happen at Fort Bliss, and to be able to take this equipment and test it every single 4 months and get through those integration challenges and into the hands of our soldiers. I think it's going to be big for our network, and it's going to be big for other equipment we want to get in the hands of the warfighter as quickly as possible.
Sir, how will the acquisition strategy change in light of this, and how will competition be applied in production?
Sir, one of the biggest challenges that we have in acquisition, Dr. O'Neill, my boss, the Army Acquisition Executive, and myself, is the alignment of programs, program executive offices, and program managers in execution of the network strategy. It is the most important program that we will execute. So what we're doing today is aligning programs that were just mentioned, like Joint Tactical Radio System and WIN-T, to align them with a strategy, doing the testing out at Fort Bliss, White Sands, to make sure that the programs and the acquisition strategies aligned with the needs of the Army in terms of our Army Force Generation, or R4Gen. And that piece of it, we're going to work really hard. Joint Tactical Radio System, I'll talk a little bit about that. We're aligning the acquisition strategies we're seeking to accelerate for the rifleman radio that was mentioned in the demonstration we just did down at Fort Bragg last week. We're driving toward a Milestone C decision in July. For airborne maritime fixed station jitters, we're looking for a Milestone C in early FY12. Ground mobile radio for a Milestone C this year. So we're driving the key components of the network strategy toward acquisition decisions on a short timeline, and we're delivering. And I agree with my partner Bob Lennox that we've made great strides over the last year in JTRS as well as WIN-T. Critically important.
And you said it in your opening statement, Mr. Chairman. The key here is non-proprietary software. We call these things radios. They're not radios. They're small computers. That's what they are. Different sizes of computers, IP-based. And because we have non-proprietary waveforms in the soldier radio waveform, in all the waveforms, we don't care who builds the box as long as it carries our waveform. And that is the Jitters business model, and that's going to spur competition. And we're not going to necessarily go out and buy one for everyone to start with. We will let the competition make those boxes better and cheaper. That's the model, the business model that we've adopted with Jitters, and we're excited about it. And not everybody is, but we sure are.
Okay. Thank you very much. I have now one question, and this for the record. Supplying our troops in Afghanistan has focused increased attention on a number of things, and one of them is the line haul tractor. I've been told the Army has not held a competition for the M915 line haul tractor in nearly 11 years. Why would there not be a business case to pursue a full and open competition? Is the M915A5 basically a commercial vehicle, or has it changed significantly in the last 10 to 15 years? How does the Army know it's getting the best truck available for the best possible price? Is it possible that industry could provide a safer, more fuel-efficient truck at less cost than the Army is currently paying for the M915A5? Does the Army plan to pursue a competitive procurement of line haul trucks in FY18 in support of a new line haul capabilities production document requirement? You may answer this multifaceted faceted question for the record. Thank you all very much for your testimony. Thank you for your service. And we will recess this panel and impanel the next witnesses. Thank you very much. Thank you, gentlemen, for taking your time to join us. I've been to the floor a number of times to do a special order after the close of business. As they pan the floor, you may note that there's nobody in the chamber. But there are somewhere between 1.5 million and 2.5 million people watching, in addition to staff and members in a lot of their offices. I just returned from Afghanistan, and I was surprised that soldiers there told me that they watched our hearings here. So although there are a few of us here at the hearing, be assured that there are many people watching this, so be careful what you say, and that this will be a part of the permanent record that people will pore over for quite a while to come. Thank you very much for joining us. Dr. Gilmore, please proceed. You'll be followed by Mr. Sullivan.
Chairman Bartlett, Congressman Reyes, members of the committee, I'm happy to be here no matter how many of you are actually in the chamber. I consider it an honor to be here. I'll just very briefly summarize my written testimony, beginning with the results of testing of the earlier Enhanced Infantry Brigade Combat Team systems, then moving on to testing of Stryker Double V Hull, which General Corelli referred to, and then closing with an assessment, a quick assessment of the plans to continue testing our Army network systems over the next several years. Unfortunately, with regard to the testing of the EIBCT systems that was conducted last year, my assessment remains the same actually as it was based on the results of the testing that was conducted a year prior to that, which is that with the exception of the small unmanned ground vehicle, the systems under test really demonstrated very little, if any, military utility. The unattended ground sensors provided the test units little useful tactical intelligence. The images that they provided were frequently blank or contained little, if any, useful information. The sensors were difficult to conceal and easily identified by the opposing force, which precluded their utility. Connecting them to the network was complex, and in fact, the majority of the time during the test, the soldiers did not succeed in connecting the sensors to the network. And also, since the information that was collected that was useful primarily locally to the units that were actually in charge of the sensors, there really wasn't much point in trying to connect the sensors to the network, although some of them can only be controlled if they are actually connected to the network. The primary purpose of the Network Integration Kit and its key component, the Joint Tactical Radio System Ground Mobile Radio, which I'll refer to as the GMR, is to provide the mobile adaptive internet, enabling information from the sensors to be shared among all echelons of command during combat. Because the sensors provided essentially no useful information, the key function that the NIC, the Network Integration Kit, has was not demonstrated during the test. Now, the NIC and the GMR, while providing the mobile adaptive internet, actually have many more purposes than just that, and in fact, the GMR is planned to replace a number of the existing radios, including radios that provide secure voice communications for the soldiers. This was the first time that the secure voice communications capability of the GMR was tested under operationally realistic conditions, and 70% of the time it didn't work, which meant that the test units had to rely on the existing legacy radios that they had, or if they didn't have them, they had to use runners, which is something that hasn't been done regularly since World War II. The NIC startup and reboot times were very long, in excess of the 25-minute requirement. The NIC was complex to operate, and the soldiers expressed little confidence in it, frequently turning it off or putting it in standby when they went on offensive missions. Also, there were critical information assurance vulnerabilities that were found in the NIC. Now, the Army reports that it has fixed the last three problems that I mentioned, and we will have an opportunity to test those fixes during the upcoming tests this spring and this summer that General Corelli mentioned, and I'll touch on briefly at the end of my remarks. The Class 1 Block 0 unmanned aerial system was not useful in offensive operations due to its weight and bulkiness. It was not useful in situations requiring surprise because it's very loud. It was most useful when used from a static defensive position, and it was meant to be used in many more situations than those. It was also unreliable and crashed. The unit showed a preference for the existing Raven U unmanned aerial system over the Class 1 UAS because the Raven is quieter, was easier to deploy, and had longer endurance. The small unmanned ground vehicle, as I mentioned, did provide useful military capability. It can be used for remote investigation of potential threats, such as improvised explosive devices. It was also used to support a range of other tactical missions, including clearing buildings or caves and traffic control points, but its utility is limited by the fact that, for example, in a building, if it goes around a couple of corners and the building has rather thick walls, the operator loses radio communications with the unmanned ground vehicle and has to go retrieve it. And in a number of instances during the test, that exposed the operator, and the operator was scored as being killed. So there can be improvements made to the small unmanned ground vehicle, but it does provide useful military capability. There were several lessons learned that I mentioned in my written testimony from this experience with the EIBCT systems. I think the most important one for me is that rigorous testing of these systems beginning as early as possible is really mandatory. These systems originated in the Future Combat Systems program, which started back in 2000. After 9 years, we did operationally realistic tests of these systems. We found that the majority of them didn't provide military utility. I can say, I think, without challenge, that should have been discovered much sooner and could have been discovered much sooner if more rigorous developmental testing had been done than was. With regard to the Stryker double V-shaped hull, we have been doing a robust test program, both live fire and operational, of that vehicle to support deployment in June 2011. That is just one of many examples I can cite of doing rapid, robust testing to support rapid fielding of such a system. The preliminary results of that live fire testing are very positive. It indicates that the Stryker double V hull provides substantially increased protection to crew relative to the existing flat bottom Strykers, as they're called, that are deployed in the theater. But that testing also indicates, and it was the first time comprehensive testing was done of the existing flat bottom Strykers, that they provide better than expected protection of the crew, and in fact, in a number of instances meet the threshold protection requirements that are levied upon the all-terrain version of the mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles. However, there is testing that remains to be done of the Stryker double V hull in order to assure that all of its variants provide needed protection. Nonetheless, I support fielding the system as soon as possible based on these test events. As far as Army network testing is concerned, this summer's integrated network baseline event is going to be the Army's first major test within its FY 11-12 integrated evaluation schedule, and General Corelli talked about his plan to do this continuous testing in order to support rapid fielding, and I certainly support that strongly. In this particular case, this summer, the Army intends to conduct 6 so-called limited user tests under operationally realistic conditions to support production or fielding decisions for systems including the Joint Tactical Radio System ground mobile radio. I am focused in that test, as far as the GMR is concerned, on demonstrating that, notwithstanding the somewhat disappointing results of the test last year, that the radio can be used in a 20 to 30 node network to rapidly provide useful information to soldiers in combat on the battlefield. I am concerned about the testing that's planned, primarily because in order to make this testing worthwhile, the requisite planning has to be done, and that is behind schedule. The individual systems that will compose the network, how they will interact with one another, where they will be deployed, at what echelons has yet to be determined, even though we're supposed to start testing in June. And the Army Test and Evaluation Command has not yet developed a plan for conducting the test, collecting data, and evaluating the data. We are late to need for all that information, and we are working with the Army to develop it as quickly as possible. But if we are not able to get that information in line here very quickly, then we run a risk that this first major event will not produce all the information we need. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Mr. Sullivan.
Chairman Bartlett, Ranking Member Reyes, members of the subcommittee, I'm pleased to be here today to discuss Army modernization. My oral statement will focus on efforts to initiate the Ground Combat Vehicle Acquisition Program, developments in the Initial Brigade Combat Team Program, and emerging plans for the future tactical network, I have a written statement I'd like to submit for the record. I'll begin with the Ground Combat Vehicle Program. After several false starts, the Army now appears to have reduced the GCV's expected capabilities in favor of a stronger focus on mature technologies to control cost. However, we believe there are critical questions that must be addressed as the Army begins technology development on that system. These include questions about the urgency of the need for the vehicle, the depth of the analysis supporting the preferred concept, the feasibility of a 7-year delivery schedule, and whether the program will be able to deliver key capabilities using only mature technologies. It's imperative, in our opinion, that the Army demonstrate the match between those requirements it needs and the available resources before it proceeds past a milestone B decision by the spring of 2013. With regard to the first and second increments of the initial brigade combat team systems, the Director of Operational Test has indicated that most demonstrated little or no military utility in recent user tests. In response, the Army decided not to pursue the second increment and terminated all but 2 of the first increment's systems, the small unmanned ground vehicle and the network integration kit. However, the Army still assesses the maturity of 2 technologies critical to the kit's performance, the wideband networking waveform and the soldier radio waveform, as very low maturity at this point and still risky. We believe this raises legitimate questions about whether procurement of up to 181 units is appropriate at this time. The results of these tests have prompted the Army to review its requirement setting process to determine how validated requirements that have come through TRADOC can translate into little or no military utility. One explanation may be that these systems were spun out of the future combat system concept, and the Army restructured the acquisitions without an adequate analysis of the new post-FCS operational environment. Finally, the Army Tactical Network has recently been established as a special interest portfolio. I think the last panel talked a little bit about that. The Army is now developing an integrated network architecture and a comprehensive acquisition strategy for it, and plans to deliver that strategy, we've been told, sometime this month in March. The Army's first step is to establish an understanding of the network requirements and develop strategies to manage a number of communications, command, and control acquisitions in a coordinated fashion. These recent developments in Army acquisition present new questions for the Army that it really must address. It is not helpful to promise early capabilities, as we've seen here, if they are not technically mature or reliable. Last year, we cautioned that moving too fast with immature designs could cause additional delays as contractors concurrently address technology design and production issues. The Army must now incorporate that lesson as it examines its current acquisition strategies. After a rough start, the Army's shown a willingness to rethink its original ground combat vehicle acquisition approach, for example. However, the acquisition strategy is still very ambitious, allowing just 4 years of product development before delivering its first vehicle. During the next 2 years in technology development, the Army must determine whether this proposed time frame is sufficient. If not, it must be prepared to add time and resources to the development of the ground combat vehicle, and it must retain the flexibility and the resolve, frankly, to ensure that the right work gets done now. And that means good systems engineering, good technology development, and good requirements definition. The GCV acquisition, if done right, could be a breakthrough for Army acquisitions. However, if the risks are not appropriately accounted for right now, it could end up in the same failed position that the Army found itself in with the FCS and other programs. More importantly, decisions on whether and how the ground combat vehicle program enters the acquisition process will define how recent acquisition reform legislation will actually be implemented. These decisions will be symbolic from that standpoint. The Congress and the Department have enacted acquisition reforms in both legislation and policy, and now is the time to enforce those reforms by making the tough decisions at the service, the Department, and at the congressional levels. If this program does not measure up to the standards in law and in policy, yet is approved and wins funding, it will be a setback to acquisition reform. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my prepared statement. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Graveline, for joining us. I understand you'll be available for questions.
Yes, sir. Happy to be here.
Thank you. Let me turn now to my good friend and ranking member, Mr. Reyes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Gilmore, in your testimony, you raised some concerns about how the Army will conduct a major network testing event at Fort Bliss this summer, as you made mention. Can you be a little more specific about your concerns, aside from the comments that you made, in, I guess, putting it in context in terms of the requirement to be able to function in an integrated manner?
My concern is that we don't know how many GMRs are going to be in the test. We don't know what units will have them at what levels. We don't know what kind of information the test units will try to transmit over the mobile internet. Absent that kind of information, it's very difficult to plan for the test. We also don't know the same thing for WIN-T and some of the other systems that are going to be tested. We don't know what the Army's plan is for collecting data. We don't know that the Army is going to have sufficient capacity to collect the digital information needed to do a full assessment of the performance of the systems. These are things that we would expect at this point to already know. Hopefully we will know them by the middle of this month, around the 18th of March. That is the current schedule on which this information should be provided. However, originally it was supposed to have been provided a month ago. And if we're going to start testing in June, then we don't know how many radios are going to be in the test, who's going to be using them, what they're going to be trying to use them to do, how the information is going to be collected. That's a concern.
If you were asked, what would be your recommendations as to the first of all, the ability to conduct the test, secondly, the ability to track the data that you're concerned about, and third, how the results would be utilized? What would be your recommendations?
First of all, we can conduct the tests, but we have to plan appropriately when you have to have enough time to do that planning. In fact, that was a lesson learned from the operational testing of the EIBCT systems in 2009, where we had a good plan, but we couldn't execute it, and so we didn't get as much information as we needed in 2009. We can conduct the tests. We need sufficient time to plan them, and we need to make sure that the Army Test and Evaluation Command is staffed and has the infrastructure necessary to collect the data and analyze it. So at this point, my recommendation would be, and this may be not greeted with joy by some senior leaders in the Army, my recommendation would be that we wait until the end of the window for testing this summer in order to do the test. There's a window over which it could be conducted. Currently, it's planned to begin at the beginning of that window, at the earliest possible time. I would recommend at this point that we look hard at giving ourselves a little more time to plan the test, not delaying it, a significantly long amount of time, but maybe delaying it about 6 weeks so that we have sufficient time to plan the test so that it can be executed in such a way that it gives us the information that we really need to support General Corelli's desire, and I fully support it, to get this equipment out into the field as quickly as we can.
So based on your work, your concerns are predicated on either the lack of information or lack of access to the information, or what is the basis for your concern?
It's not the lack of access to information. We're working well with the Army. They are sharing information as they have it. So there's no problem with access to information. It's just they have not yet been able to figure this out. And that's not a criticism of, of the Army. I don't mean this as a harsh criticism at all. This is going to be one of the most complex tests the Army has ever conducted of its communication systems. And it will be a comprehensive test, and I support it. We need to do comprehensive tests of these networks. But because it is comprehensive and it is so complex, and this is the first time we're attempting it, so we're just beginning to learn how to do this, we need to make sure that we have enough time to make this test a success. And then as we move forward, we will learn and we'll be able to support the Army's desire and General Crowley's vision to do these tests every few months, every year, and have them yield the information we need to get this equipment out into the field quickly. But this is the first one. It's very complex, and so I would recommend that we take a little more time to make sure that it's a success.
I guess the obvious question is, have you made those recommendations, and what has the Army responded?
I have discussed this with General Del Rocco, who is the commander of the Army Test and Evaluation Command, and we are working on it. He shares a number of my concerns. Of course, he and the Army leadership are reluctant until they absolutely have to admit that a delay may be in order. And they may come up with this information in the next couple of weeks, and it may be sufficiently comprehensive that I would then evaluate that a delay is not needed. I don't mean to completely prejudge this. I'm just expressing a concern because this information is already late to need.
Okay, thank you. Just one more question for Mr. Sullivan. In your testimony, you raised concerns about the 7-year schedule to the ground combat vehicle.
Yes, sir.
However, the Army is still evaluating, as we understand it, the 3 bids it received from the defense industry. So I guess what I'm wondering is, how can you assess that the schedule is quote-unquote high risk if you haven't seen what the different companies will propose?
Well, I think, I guess to clarify that a little bit, it's not necessarily that we see it at high risk at this point. We haven't seen enough, I guess, but just judging from past history and how these programs have gone before, 7 years is a very ambitious schedule. So what we have is a lot of questions. I think that's probably, right now there are a lot of questions, and it may take a year or so to sort these out. But what we're really concerned about is if, when they do get to a milestone A and a milestone B, we want to make sure that the decision makers make decisions based on really good knowledge. So, what we look for is the maturity of the technologies they're using, and to make sure that the required capabilities they're going for are really doable. Right now, we're waiting to see. I guess that's the best way to put it.
Fair enough. And since the Army has stated that they're taking an incremental approach to this development, is it possible that the first phase, the first increment, will not achieve all the requirements based on the benchmarks, and that it's designed that way to
yes. In fact, we would
develop it slower and more methodically.
Yes, sir. In fact, that's what we've advocated. We've done a lot of work looking at best practices on how to develop products, and we've always said that if you can do it in a knowledge-based way, where you really truly understand your requirements and you do it incrementally, not in such a revolutionary fashion, like a lot of the weapon systems where they begin inventing things. That is the best way to do it, because as long as you're delivering needed value to the warfighter and improved value over what they have, and you're getting that to the warfighter a lot quicker, we see that as a win-win. So the first increment, not being real sexy and a big bang or anything, as long as it meets the warfighter's needs, that's a good thing.
And based on General Corelli's testimony earlier, the manner in which the Abrams tank, he mentioned it's been upgraded numerous times, and that's basically, at least the way I understood it, that's basically the approach they're using for the GCV. Is that in your mind a good approach? Is that
that is the approach we would actually like to see. We'll believe it when we see it, I guess, is one way to put it.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Dr. Gilmore, one of the striking outcomes of the 2010 limited tester using of the early Infantry Brigade combat team equipment was that a majority of performance requirements were demonstrated. But in spite of that, the equipment provided little or no military utility for the force. How could this have happened, sir?
I can't give you a completely definitive answer. I can give you my impressions. The requirements that existed tended to be, for the most part, what I would characterize as technical performance specifications that engineers could relatively easily measure. So there were requirements for the resolution of the cameras used in the unattended ground sensors, for example. What the requirements didn't specify was that the sensors should be capable of being easily concealed. This was a problem for both sets of sensors, the urban unattended ground sensors, which are similar in appearance to the kinds of sensors that the alarm company I use in my home sticks up on my wall, as well as the tactical unattended ground sensors, which are larger sensor sets that are placed outside. One of the problems with those, well, there are several problems with them, but one of the problems with those is that in order to connect to the network, there's a large antenna that sticks up where the sensor field is, basically saying, in case, enemy, you were wondering where the sensors are, they're right over here where this antenna is. So the primary problem seemed to be, and this is not unique to Army programs, is that the requirements were stated mostly in terms of technical specifications that were easily measured, and those technical specifications certainly have to be satisfied in order for the systems to be useful. In other words, the camera did have to have sufficient resolution for you to be able to recognize a face, for example, or recognize a human versus something else. But they aren't sufficient to guarantee military utility. To fix this problem, and in fact I think the Decker-Wagner panel and its recommendations addressed some of these problems with requirements, and I agree with a number of their findings, but we need to get the operators involved much sooner in the development of requirements. It shouldn't be a bureaucratic process. The operators need to get involved early on. And I would suggest that the testers should get involved early on, particularly people from my office. The law last year made my office an official advisor to the Joint Requirements Oversight Council. I view that as a good thing. We are participating in JROC deliberations. But that's not sufficient. We have to get involved earlier in the service, when the services themselves, before they bring the requirements to the JROC, when they're actually developing them, to give them our perspectives and our lessons learned on what we have found useful when we've done testing and what we haven't. And we also monitor what goes on in the field. And then also we can advise them on whether requirements are technically realistic or not, based on our experience. And then when they're technically realistic, if they are, we can advise them on what the implications are for testing of those requirements. So getting more people involved earlier, particularly the real operators and the testers who have a lot of experience, would be very useful. And I think that that is consistent with some of the recommendations made by the Decker-Wagner panel.
Thank you. We understand that the results of the 2009 limited user testing were obscured by poor reliability of the equipment being tested. Are you more confident with the results of the 2010 limited user testing?
Yes, I am. The reliability of many of the systems was, as you note, very poor in the 2009 testing. But with regard to operational effectiveness, we saw many of the same things in 2010, albeit with substantially improved reliability, with the exception of systems like the unmanned aerial system. We saw essentially the same kinds of things. In the 2009 limited user test, we saw that the majority of the images taken by both sets of sensors were blank or blurry and didn't provide useful information. We saw that the UAS was noisy and difficult to pack around and had limited utility. So, unfortunately, the answer is yes. I am confident that the assessment that we've generated is correct.
In regards to weapon systems taking too long to get into production, some believe that we might shorten that time by reducing the quantity of testing. Can you comment on this? In this regard, what should the individual services be doing that they currently aren't now doing to work more effectively and efficiently with your organization?
Let me comment first on this proposition that we should be, cutting back on testing. My office doesn't want to do gold-plated testing. We don't want to do any more testing than is required, but we do want to do testing that is sufficiently robust so that decision makers here in the Congress and in the executive branch have the information they need as quickly as they can get it to make decisions on these systems, which frequently cost many billions, if not tens of billions of dollars. And that's an important mission my office has under the law. But even more importantly, we want the information to be available to the commanders in the field and the soldiers in the field so that they understand what they're getting and, just as importantly, what they are not getting. And my office has demonstrated, in the case of V. Hall, in the case of testing of the mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles, both the original versions of the vehicles and the all-terrain versions of the vehicles, in the ongoing testing of the Gray Eagle ERMP UAV, in which my office took the initiative to combine testing and training at the National Training Center so that we could not only get test data but also train the units, because we saw that they weren't being trained sufficiently when they were being deployed as part of the quick reaction packages that are now being deployed to Afghanistan. We want to do testing as quickly as possible to get equipment that works into the field so that the soldiers in combat can use it. But what I mentioned as a lesson learned here, I think, is a clear lesson learned, and that is, to do that, to get equipment into the field quickly, you need to do robust, rigorous testing early and often. And so one of the things that I've been pushing, even though I'm in charge of operational testing, the law says I can advise on developmental testing, I have been pushing for earlier, more rigorous developmental testing. And I see that, unfortunately, in many instances, including the EIBCT systems, that hasn't been done. We need to do that. Then I will not be giving you these pessimistic operational test reports, which I do not enjoy giving you. It's much better if we can detect these problems early when they can be fixed more cheaply, or we can make an informed decision that, fixing these problems really isn't going to be cost effective. It isn't really going to be feasible. We need to stop and pursue a different approach. So I think it's key to do rigorous, robust testing, not gold-plated testing. That will yield, if we do it and if we plan for it, that will enable us to get these systems into the field more quickly. Not as quickly as we often plan for, because unfortunately the Department of Defense still is the Department of wishful thinking in many ways, but more quickly than will otherwise happen if we have to redo tests, redesign equipment, restructure programs, with all of the efficiency and increased costs that yields. So I hope that answers your question, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. In your testimony, you mentioned that developmental testing is the key to successful operational testing. How can we improve the relationship between developmental testing and operational testing?
And this gets to the one question that you asked me previously that I actually didn't answer, and so I'll try to do that now. You need to get the testers involved early. Just as I said, we need to be involved early in the development of requirements. We need to be involved early in the programs, once the programs offices are set up and once the program managers are installed. And we are willing to do that. We are doing that. For example, we've done it in Stryker V. Hall. We're doing it in Gray Eagle. I can go down the list. If you get the testers involved early, and I can cite you many examples in all of the services where that is happening. I can also cite you some examples where it is not happening. For example, it didn't occur in the Joint Strike Fighter program until within the last year and a half, and particularly with the advent of Admiral Van Lett taking charge of that program. The restructuring that occurred in JSF under Secretary Carter and Admiral Van Lett, it dealt with problems that are mentioned in detail in several of the DOT&E annual reports, preceding my assumption of this office, but continuing in the report that I issued last year, in the reports I issued last year and this year. So getting us involved, having a dialogue with us, listening to our concerns, let us understand what the concerns of the program managers are, because they are always under the gun for time and schedule, and we understand that. And we want to help them out in both regards. But getting us involved early and getting the developmental testers involved earlier, and doing more robust governmental testing as well as contractor testing. Under a number of these contracts that have been led over the last decade, we've been relying on the contractors to do the testing, and the record is not very good. So I think we need to reinvigorate government developmental testing. All those things will clearly help.
Sir, across the, the department, we have trouble during operational testing. How much of that do you think is due to a lack of quality developmental testing, along with trying to test immature technologies?
The short answer is much of it. I think it was true in the case of the IBCT. It's been true, for example, another example is the Advanced Anti-Radiation Guided Missile. Early last year, I was presented a test plan for operational testing of that missile. I reviewed the developmental testing that had been done, which was just a few shots. My response was to the Navy acquisition leadership, I'm not going to prevent you from going to operational testing because I know you'll learn a lot from it. But I think you're also going to be disappointed by the results. So they took the missiles, they put them on the aircraft, and the missiles started to fail for a variety of different reasons. A variety of different failure modes manifested themselves. The planes would take off in the operational test squadron. They would have to turn back because the missiles failed and couldn't be fired. This happened so often that the commander of the operational test squadron said, we're going to stop testing. We can't fire the missiles. We can't test. And we don't, and there's so many different failures occurring, we don't know what's happening. So they stopped the operational test, which was unfortunately what I had thought would probably happen based on my review of what the developmental testing was. Now they've been working on the missiles to try and fix the problems. I got a report just last week that they have unfortunately still been exhibiting a lot of failures, many of which are not yet completely understood. These are problems that should not surface for the first time during operational testing. They should be worked out during developmental testing, and unfortunately they're not. So again, the short answer to your question is yes, that is clearly a problem, and I hope that we can work to fix it. Now, it's hard. It's hard even when budgets are fat, and the budgets are not fat now. And it's very hard for a program manager who is under the gun for budget and schedule to take additional time and spend additional money for testing. Then it comes to operational test, and I have to report very straightforwardly, both to the Secretary of Defense and to you, what the results are. And those results, when they're stark and they're publicized in that manner, then force them to go back and restructure the program and relook. And that's a good thing, better late than never, but it would be much, much better if that happened sooner.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Sullivan, as the Army proceeds to implement its network investment strategy, what advice would you offer the Army on how to proceed? What are the major areas of risk for the Army to focus in its management attention?
Well, I think most importantly is that the idea that they do it incrementally, which I think they're trying to do now anyway. And the director here has been talking an awful lot about it, developmental testing and immature technologies and things like that. I think they have to work with technologies in advance in order to make sure they are mature. As we know, the network integration kits, for example, have immature technologies. They were ready to go to procurement with this. In fact, they've procured 81 kits already, and they still have immature technologies on that. So in a way, I think they're doing a lot of the things that we probably would recommend, and maybe Mr. Gravelin could weigh in on this, but they're taking an incremental approach. They're kind of decentralizing this. This is not the future combat system of systems operation anymore. And they're not relying as much on the information and, the ground combat vehicle, for example, is going to be a big, heavy vehicle again so that, it can have a lot of power and carry a lot of subsystems. They've reduced the emphasis on information cutting through the fog of war. I don't know, Bill, if you have anything to add.
I would just echo some of the things that Mike said was about the incremental approach and building on the current foundation of the network that they already have, because there are a lot of the pieces are in place in the current forces now, And then secondly, their approach for demonstrating on a regular basis at Fort Bliss, building up the network over time there, having the operational forces working with it on a regular basis, working out the bugs, learning best ways how to use it. That's a very good approach.
Thank you. As the Army approaches the launch of the technology development phase of the ground combat vehicle, what do you see as the major areas of risk for this program to meet its performance expectations within 7 years?
I think as I was talking with Congressman Reyes about that, it's hard to tell right now really what the risks are. We do know that they had an extreme amount of risk, I think, with their first RFP in the areas of armor. You know, I think they had a lot of very, very immature technologies they were looking for armor protection, and then a lot of the sensors on there, a lot of the 360-degree protection that they were looking for was calling for technologies that were pretty high risk and pretty immature. Now, they pulled back the RFP. They looked at it again, and we've been told that they reduced the need for a lot of those technologies. They've reduced the capability in order to be able to control time and cost a little bit more. The question, so there's a risk there, are they going to get enough bang for their buck? And, you know, that's kind of the balance, I think, that you have to play when you try to go for an incremental approach like that. So the risk on ground combat vehicle now is, number one, we probably would like to take a better look at what the RFP really calls for, what technologies they are trying to integrate into a system, and then in that short period of time whether or not they can do you know, kind of a clean sheet of paper design. There's a lot of integration risk, I guess, too. Not just technology, but system integration risk. They need a lot of systems engineering done early on that program.
You question in your written statement whether the Army's final assessment of the reduced GCV requirements during its analysis of alternatives was sufficiently robust. Can you expand a bit on this?
Yes, I think when we looked at the first RFP that went out, first of all, they initiated the beginnings of the program before the analysis of alternatives was complete. So they kind of had an RFP out there for some exotic technologies needed to meet the capabilities before they had the analysis done. When the analysis, the original analysis of alternatives came in for the first set of requirements, it came in and said that this was a very risky, basically there was no way that they could accomplish this in 7 years. There was too much technology risk, too much integration risk. You know, the industrial base probably wasn't fully prepared for this. But that's when the Army and they said, I think they put an estimate on the eventual unit cost of the ground combat vehicle somewhere between $18 and $23 million, which busted the Army's budget. The Army's looking for a target of somewhere around $10 million. To the Army's credit, that's when they pulled that RFP back. When they sent the new one out with a new set of requirements that were lower, the analysis team looked at that again, but we don't believe that they did a full analysis. In fact, we would recommend, one thing that we would recommend at this point in the ground combat vehicle is that they do a robust, very quantitative analysis of this new RFP before they get too much further down the road. They did a kind of a qualitative assessment. I don't want to, you know, the team looked at it. They didn't do the modeling and simulation they had done before. They just kind of looked at the changes they made and looked at the delta and said, yeah, this looks less risky, more or less.
I have a couple questions about lessons we learned with the procurement of MRAPs. How long was it from we need it till we had it?
Well, I'll be a little bit fuzzy on this, but I think it was within a couple of years when they, you know, once an urgent need statement went in, to the time they delivered the first systems, I think was within 2 years. Is that right?
Yeah, I believe so. There seemed to be some lag from there was some tracing back of the original needs from the warfighters, and that seemed to take some time to get up to the right levels and get the need statements.
But suffice to say, it was an efficient process.
Yes.
It certainly was. And is the ground combat vehicle so enormously more complex? Does it have so many more required capabilities? My understanding is that the MRAPs have done pretty much what we wanted it to do, and we kind of bypass all of our very meticulous checkpoints to get it there as quickly as we could, and we really did. We got it there in a couple of years. You're looking at a program here that's 7 years, 3.5 times longer, and you're questioning whether it's doable or not. What kind of lessons have we learned from the procurement of MRAPs that might help us here? Do we really need to go through? This really was revolutionary, wasn't it?
Well, the MRAP, it certainly was an incredible development and acquisition program to meet an extremely urgent need. It met the need. I don't know that it was a revolutionary. I mean, basically what they did.
I didn't mean so that the platform was revolutionary. I meant the procurement was revolutionary.
The speed of time it took for them to get that fielded was incredible.
It was incredible.
Mr. Chairman, could I
offer
something here? We were already building, MRAPs were already being built. It's a very heavy armored truck. It was not a great leap forward in technology.
But it met our needs, did it not?
And it met our needs.
Doesn't that beg the question, do we really need all of these technologies to meet our needs, since the MRAPs obviously did?
It depends upon what those needs are. The needs in the case of MRAP were clear and relatively simple. Protect crew from underbody blast, which was actually something the Army hadn't really thought about a lot prior to the experience in Iraq, because it hadn't had that experience. The South Africans had, and so they had already designed the predecessors of the MRAPs that we have, and were already building them, as were others. So if you're not going to take a revolutionary leap forward, you can design and test in parallel and produce in parallel with testing and get the equipment into the field very quickly. And is it possible, in my view, to do a ground combat vehicle in 7 years or even less than 7 years? Yes, but it depends upon what kind of requirements you're trying to impose. If you're trying to impose a great leap forward in sensor technology or active protection system technology, then you may need 7 years or you may need more. If you're trying to build an upgraded version of a Bradley, you can do that relatively quickly. So, the requirements and the schedule go together. And by the way, the budgets are coupled in there too. The costs are coupled in there too. Now, I've heard, it's expressed by senior leaders in the Army, well, only once every 20 years or so do we get an opportunity to build a new ground combat vehicle, so we want to get the best that we possibly can. And I understand that view. But if we want to get the best that we possibly can, and that turns into a revolutionary leap forward, then it will take time to get it. If we're willing to settle for somewhat less, then we can do it more quickly.
Mr. Sullivan?
One thing I would say about the ground combat vehicle now is that if you think about it, really, they're doing, what we're talking about really, the period of time where you're investing very, very large sums of money in product development, that really isn't going to begin on that program till 2013. So what they're talking about is that product development period of really only 4 years. This 2-year period they're going to do now is kind of, playing around with technologies and risk and kind of playing in the sandbox stuff with, I know it's a lot of money, but it's a lot less money than when they finally say, okay, we're going to start integrating these products and doing all the full-scale testing on them. So I think we're probably talking about 4 years, which is a little less. And then I would say that probably because it is kind of a clean sheet of paper, it is going to have more capability and probably be at more risk than an MRAP. It's going to be a combat vehicle. It probably will be it will take a little more time. But I get what you're saying.
Mr. Reyes has a comment, observation, question.
Well, and mine's predicated on the issue of immature technologies. for instance, sensors. We were dropping long-range reconnaissance patrols on the Ho Chi Minh Trail north of the DMC in 1967, 1968, and they had these PSEDs, portable seismic intrusion devices that they were called, that they would just lay on the trails because there were no friendlies. All they needed to know was that there was an alert, that there was somebody coming at them on these various trails, so they would put those out there to be able to respond, and they would put claymores and all these other kinds of protective devices in place. But my point to that is, in 1972, when I was then in the Border Patrol, we were using these PSEDs, surplus from Vietnam,
right,
in the Border Patrol in 72. So sensors have been around for 40+ years now that I personally work with, and I saw Fort Bliss is in my district, so I saw a lot of the soldiers that came back from mostly veterans from Iraq that got a chance to evaluate the sensors, the robots. Yeah, that flying keg, if the wind was too high, it wouldn't maneuver right, and all these other things. But I can tell you, those soldiers were very much impressed and said, we wish we could have had these. For instance, some were veterans of Fallujah, and they wished that they could have used robots to go down those alleys rather than soldiers, their buddies that got killed because they went down those alleys. So when we talk about immature technologies, we're not talking, I hope we're not talking about sensors, and we're not talking about robots, because they've been around a long time. We've seen them evolve very quickly, as the chairman has said. In wartime, we have the capacity and the capability to accelerate these things because lives are on the line. I was with Chairman Hunter, and as the chairman here was, when we went to Quantico to test some of the armor repulsive capability to do the VHUL on the MRAMs and stuff like that. So I, like the chairman, think I'm all for testing, and I'm all for making sure that we follow the carpenter's rule, measure twice and cut once, but we just have to streamline this process because we have seen it done better, and that's why I wanted to comment on the immature technologies, because sensors have been around, in my lifetime since I was a soldier going into North Vietnam to drop these LRPs in there. And frankly, I was amazed that we were still in the Combat Evaluation Brigade, that we were still evaluating these things. And I guess when I asked the questions, they said it's because they have to be part of the network. And it's not just the squad that's using these things, like the LRPs, that are going to have to maneuver and respond to them. They want to have it at the company level, at the battalion level, so that they can see a fuller picture of what the battlefield looks like. That was a reason that they gave me why they needed to be a little more complex. But Border Patrol today is using those. They bury the battery, and there's nothing that sticks out except a little reed-like antenna. So the capability to hide them was not an issue.
Well, yeah, I think that's an instance where you're certainly not gold-plating the requirements, right? They're using pretty much what they need.
Right.
And, I would say there's a lot of programs, if you look at the F-16, for example, there's a pretty high-tech instrument, and that wasn't really, when you look at it, it was an incremental. The sensors on the F-16, all those sensors weren't on there in the first one that came out in the 70s, right? But they were able to, they worked the tech base, and I think sensors and subsystems do this a lot better. When you have a platform like a ground combat vehicle, which will eventually grow into all of these sensors as they develop. That's something different. You know, that's where you got to get the technologies right on that. But we, you know, you do see a lot. F-16, F-15 were examples of pretty good acquisitions where they did that incrementally, and you can take advantage of. You know, you grow the sensors and grow their capabilities in the tech base. You know, you invent and do trial and error with the S&T money, and when they're ready, they should be able to snap into a ground combat vehicle. That's another thing about this is open systems architecture is critical for all of that.
That was going to be my final question. When will we know enough about spiral development and open architecture so that we can start with a platform like the MRAPs and then have it current with technology for the next 30, 40 years of its life? Couldn't we shorten these programs? Now we try to build into the original platform all of the bells and whistles that are conceivable. Wouldn't it be better to start simple and put them in when we know that we're really mature? How far are we away from our ability to do a spiral development with open architecture so that we can do this?
Well, I would hope that the Army with the ground combat vehicle, that's one of the things that, for example, we would be looking for if we were asked to go in at Milestone B, where they make the business case. You know, we've looked at the capabilities, we've system engineered them, we've looked at the technologies needed, we know they're mature. So if you have a business case that has a lot of knowledge about what you're going to build, it's not too big. It has open systems architecture, for example, and it's going to be the first increment, but we're going to put space, power, and cooling in there and pay attention to open systems so as new technologies come available, we can snap them in, you know, plug and play. We would expect that. That's something that we would be looking for on a ground combat vehicle.
I would just say I think we can do it now. It's just a matter of deciding to do it.
So I don't.
I would also say we've done it before, perhaps not with as much forethought as you're engaging in, but the B-52 has been around for a very, very long time. It's seen many different uses. At the time it was built, people decided to build a long-range aircraft that could carry a lot of payload. They did the best job of it that they could. They probably didn't try to engage in some big analysis of what would happen even 10 years in the future because they couldn't foresee it. But they built a good truck of an aircraft at the time, the best one that they could build, and it's had a lot of use since then. So I think it's more than just thinking about the technologies that are available. It's shifting your view of what it is you want to do and changing the culture a bit.
I have one last question. Sometimes you can get 95% of the way there for half the cost of getting 100% of the way there. Who's making those kind of judgments as we move along?
Well, I would say that Secretary Gates has been making them. And not everyone agrees with all of the decisions.
But there are thousands of these little things along the way in development. And, you know, you ask for something, and if you only needed 95% of that, you might get it 2 years quicker and at half the cost. Who is out there looking at these things saying, hey, guys, do you really need 100%? Won't 95% do okay because it will cost half as much and you'll get it in half the time? Who's doing that kind of thing and looking at these programs?
I would say that Secretary Carter is doing that.
Okay.
He's done it on ground combat vehicle. I would say that General Corelli is doing that. And Secretary McHugh are doing
That's
that.
kind of a 30,000-foot evaluation.
Well, but
I'd like to see it down at the, you know.
I understand, but Undersecretary Westfall is also getting into it. Undersecretary Westfall and General Corelli are participating in these acquisition portfolio reviews, and they are bringing in their subordinates to do this. And I would say in some sense they're training their subordinates to do that, who will eventually replace them. I would agree with you that there's a way to go in terms of getting those kinds of ideas and that way of thinking down lower into the service requirements organizations and so forth. But clearly General Corelli and the Army leadership are trying to do that. Secretary Gates is trying to do that. For example, he is, you know, his push to get IRS capabilities into the theater as quickly as possible, and I think he engaged in some teachable moments with the Air Force leadership in that regard. And I agree with you if your point is that it shouldn't have to happen at the level of Secretary Gates. That's absolutely true, but it has to start somewhere, and sometimes it has to start at the top and percolate down. Also, constrained budgets are going to play a big role here. There will be no choice but to try to go for the 50 and 75% solutions, because the 90 or 95% solutions simply won't be affordable.
So by the time the Secretary gets involved, we're several billions down the road and several years late. I'd just like to see it start at the very beginning. Do you really need that? Because if you only get 95% of that, can you live with that? That only costs you half as much. People need to be asking those questions all along the line. And my perception is those questions don't get asked. You just take it as a requirement and try to fulfill it, never telling them, gee, do you really need that requirement? Or would 95% of that be okay, and that'll really cost you a whole lot less?
But the director made a good point a while back, and I think that, you know, the culture has an awful lot to do with this. The Army says, we get to do this ground combat vehicle, this is our only chance in 20 years. They're going to gold plate those requirements. They're going to make sure that this is the best thing since sliced bread. And that culture probably has to change a little bit.
Oh, my goodness. Wow. If you excuse us for just a moment to welcome an old and dear friend.
Certainly, sir.
It's good to see you. I just wanted to stick my head in. I'm sorry to interrupt.
That's okay. No problem.
You'll recognize him from his picture on the wall.
Yeah.
The older version of that guy.
There he is.
Take care. I'll be seeing you.
That's Morgan Freeman, right?
When he sat here, I sat down there at that first chair 18 years ago. Okay.
The only point I guess I would make, there's pockets of what you're talking about out there. Every once in a while they try it. You know, I'd reach back to like JDAM, the precision kit that was a simple kind of, you know, a very unsexy thing that did a lot for precision strike, right? That was an 80% solution. And I think there are some systems now. I think of P8A, for example, which I think has made some pretty good trades, you know, not gold-plated, just trying to get the job done. Because, and the reason is because they need it, because the system that it's replacing is getting really old. So, you know, when forced to, good decisions can get made.
Thank you. You've been a great panel. Thank you very, very much for your testimony and your service.
Thank you.
Thank you.